Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. For those of you who are looking for last-minute projects for Thanksgiving, maybe you need a centered piece, maybe you need a table runner or placemats or a pillow, something fast and simple that you can do quickly, I've got some great ideas for you. Check these out. For 52 weeks, I created a sample block for you where I taught you how to use your scrap stash. And I have some great ideas for you to be able to have fun, maybe making a last-minute project for next week. Here's the turkey. This was a fun one. This was from week 10, and I'm going to be putting I'll be including all of the PDFs of the instructions as well as the templates for all of these blocks that I'm going to be sharing with you. But he is adorable, and he might make a great centerpiece or a pillow, or maybe you'd like to make a runner where you have two turkeys, one on each end, as well as a Scrappy block in the center. So I'm going to be sharing these videos with you on how these were made. I also have from week 1 of the 52-week series the pumpkin block. That would make a great one for the center if you're needing to put 3 together, or maybe you'd like to use this one. This was a great one from week number 28. And it's a fun one to create. And then of course the last one from week 52 was the Acorn. So I have lots of different Scrappy blocks. Let me show you the PDFs. You'll see all of this in detail in the following videos that I'll include here. But here's the pumpkin. It's mainly using 2.5-inch squares. The instructions are with this, and that is all linked below. So that's the pumpkin. Here is the turkey. And he's got the instructions included. I'll have that linked to in the description box. There is also the PDF, so you want to make sure that you download the PDFs for that as well, and I'll teach you in the video how to do that applique, which is a lot of fun as well. And this is week 28. This one I had called this Crossing the Lines Scrappy block, and you might enjoy doing this. This is a great one for an all-over quilt using nothing but all of your scraps in this, so I would have fun creating that one. And then we have the last one that I'm sharing with you today is the Acorn block, and that's from week number 52. And again, these are mainly 2.5-inch squares that you're using from your stash. So now I'm going to link the videos in order. You'll get to watch each of them, and make sure to download the PDFs that you'll need, and I'll see you at the end. So the first thing that I want you to notice is the PDF that's attached again in the description box, and it gives you all the parts and pieces that you're going to need to make Tom the turkey. And just remember, if you're using fusible application for applique, then you do not have to worry about cutting out the seam allowance. The only reason you'd need to have this seam allowance is if you planned to do needle turn applique. But if you're using any fusible applique method, just cut or trace on the dark line that you see. You're going to need one body, you're going to need 2 eyes, you're going to need 1 gobble, 1 nose. You're going to need a total of 9 of the back feathers, 4 of the front feathers, and 2 legs. 1 has to be reversed. And that's what you're going to need for Tom the turkey. And then it shows you here the layout on the top key there. So here is Tom the turkey. He is just adorable. So what I did with all of my parts and pieces, I've got some heat and bond here. You can use steam-a-seam too. I would recommend a light steam-a-seam. A soft fuse is another really great one. It's got a paper back to it. And so what you'll do is simply lay your fusible interfacing over the, let me find my pencil here. You'll lay it over the PDF that I've given to you, and then you're simply going to trace the on the dark line, and you'll trace as many of these as you need. So in the case of the smaller feather, I would trace 4 of these on my paper, on the paper side, and then this is the glue side, as you can see. And then for my larger feather, I would trace 9 of them. For my legs, I would trace 2. 1 would have to be reversed. And an easy way to reverse it is just to flip it over, trace it on the back of the PDF so that you can see it, maybe place it up against a window, and that way, and then when you trace it on your fusible, you're going to follow that tracing, and then it will be reversed. And I'll show you that here in a moment. But that's what you're going to need to trace onto your fusible. It's a paperback fusible. Whatever paperback fusible you choose to use will be fine. Okay, so I have gone ahead and traced this leg so that it's reversed. So on the front, we have a leg that's heading off in that direction, and I have placed that PDF on paper. You could put it up to the window, and I just traced what came through there, and I'm seeing now the reverse. So we've got one leg going this direction and one leg going this direction, and that way when you trace that onto your fusible, you're going to have both legs, and each leg is going to be going in the correct direction because you need one reverse. So hopefully that explains that. Now let's take a look at all the other parts and pieces. Now you can make your turkey as colorful as you want, or make him all the same color. This turkey is yours. Have fun with him. Do whatever you will. So I simply went to my scrap stash and I pulled squares that would work for the different parts of him. Now this is a 6.5-inch square that I pulled for his body. I wanted to make sure that it was large enough, and I traced the body. Here it is in this template paper. I traced it on the fusible, and I just made sure that I had enough, and this 6.5-inch square was perfect for that. And then I pulled 6-inch squares in various colors for all of the feathers. And you'll see here that that's my legs, I guess, but you'll see on these, let me show you some that I've already done. So these are the 2 outer feathers, and I actually had enough with this 6-inch square to, I've already traced and cut out 2, which are already on the turkey here, and these are 2 more because I want to make 1 more block identical to him. So I have enough for 2 more. Out there I have this color, which is the next one, so I have 2 more that are traced that I can cut out. The next one is this orange. I have 2 more on that I have already traced. And then I have this burgundy one where I have 2 more that I've already traced. And for the one that's right behind him, I just need 1 more. And another thought that I had would be fun to put like a hat on him. That would be really cute. If he had a brim, maybe that matched this top color, that would be an adorable hat for this turkey. So let's say you plan to use needle turn applique. So I have gone ahead and traced on template plastic all of these items, and you do want to make sure you include the seam allowances then if you're going to do needle turn. And then you're actually going to trace each of these items the required number of times on the back side of your fabric and include that seam allowance, and then you'll cut them out, and then you'll actually do a needle turn applique. And there are still people who love to do that type of handwork, that needle turn. For me, I want to get stuff done quickly. In fact, I need to get stuff done quickly, so I am using the fusible, and that's what I will be demonstrating today. So what I want to demonstrate for you is how to cut those elements out. So I have just taken squares of the fusible and obviously pressed them onto the wrong side of all of these squares. And then after I've traced them on there. And now that they're pressed on, the fusible has been pressed onto the appropriate color. I wanted the feet to be on a dark square, and I wanted all of these to be on these various beautiful bright colors. I'm going to cut them out now. So I'm simply going to use a scissors, cut them out, and then what you're going to do is remove the paper backing, and that allows you to place the elements on your background square, and just kind of make sure you like where the layout is before you actually press it down. So there's one of the legs, and I'm just grabbing that paper and removing it, and you can see, hopefully you can see the shininess there. That is the heat and bond, that's the adhesive. So there is one of the legs that can be used, and then of course I'll cut out the opposite one here in a moment, and it can be placed on the turkey. I'll take you step by step through this. You're going to start laying your elements from the back towards the front. So the first thing you're going to want to do with your background square, and let me grab this one from the back end here. You are going to take your 12.5 inch, and you might even want to cut out a 13-inch square. That just allows you some extra room, and you can always square it up later. And what I am doing here, let me move this out of the way, I am simply going to take this to the iron and make sure there's a nice crease, especially out here on these edges. Those will be the creases that I'll be able to follow as I start placing my turkey elements. So with these wings right here, there are feathers out here. For me, I placed them just below these lines, and I started placing all of those, and I made sure this green one at the top, it's the 9th one actually, because these all match, and that one it's lined up with this crease up here. I wanted everything to be about 1 inch or so in from the outside, and so I started with these, placed those down. Then I started laying these two, placed those down. Then I put the body in there, and once I was happy with all of that, then I went and pressed it. I pressed it all down as once I was happy with the placement. I did put my legs here and left about 1 inch or so open. Now you could put your legs underneath, but I like the fact that the legs are visible all the way to the top there. That I think it just gives it a cute look. So that's what I have done. Once all of that was secured and pressed to the background square, then I placed the eyes, the nose, and the goblet. And the goblet is set off to the side. And you could put them on either side. It doesn't matter which side you put them on. And then I pressed those on there. Then I simply took it to my sewing machine, and I put in some light brown embroidery thread. You could choose any color you want. You might want to embroider it so that every single one of these is outlined in the color that it is. But I just used a light brown, and I used it for the entire applique purposes. And I just did a very small zigzag. I believe it was a 2.0 in width and a 1.8 in dimension there. So that is what I did for everything except the eyes. When I did the eyes, I just did a straight stitch in a circle. And I'll show you some of that here at the sewing machine. So the first thing I'm going to do is crease. I'm going to quarter this background square, and I've cut mine at 13 inches. We'll trim it up to 12.5 when we're done appliquing. And I am going to put nice crisp crease lines in there. This way I can use those as guidelines when I'm placing my Tom the Turkey on this square. All right, I want to make sure that he's centered here so you can see this. And I'm going to start with these two. I've gone ahead and removed the paper so that you don't have to watch me remove that, but I've got most of it removed. I'm going to start by placing these first two pretty much touching in the center, and just underneath, there's the crease line. It's about 3/4 of the way. Let me look at my other one. Actually, my other one is completely underneath, so I'm going to move those down. I'm trying to match this other one. The next one that I had put on my turkey was the burgundy one. And then I went to the orange. And, whoops, wrong burgundy. I haven't cut those yet. I got to cut my burgundy. Actually, I did have them cut. I just didn't see them here. So let's put this back here. This will go there. Kind of moving on me. And this one is going to go in the center. Now, I've got to even this up. I want both sides to look the same. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. Now we're going to put these little smaller front feathers on. And then, trying to get them even, then we'll put the body on. And I'm kind of looking at my other one over here just to see that I have the same amount of green feathers showing through. All right, let me flip this around so that I can just identify that I have them pretty much the same. These need to come out a little bit. And he's pretty much the same. So now that I'm happy with where he's located, I'm trying to keep the distance from each edge about the same, and the feet will come down here. I'm not going to press those on yet. But now that I'm happy with this, I am going to go ahead and press that down. And I'm not supposed to be using steam. Check your fusible. Every fusible is a little different. Make sure that you use steam or don't use steam, depending on what it requires. Okay, so now Tom the turkey he's all secured. Now I'm going to put his feet, his gobbler, his eyes, and his nose on. And don't forget to cut a reverse of the legs so that you have both sides. Press those on. Now I need to locate all of these parts and pieces. Okay, so you just heard Bailey, our Boston Terrier, going crazy at the mailman upstairs, barking like crazy. And I think she's finally quieted down. So now I'm ready to secure the gobbler, the nose, and the eyes on. I've removed the paper backing and placed them on there. I'm happy with their placement. So now I'm going to go ahead and press. And now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, load up my thread and my bobbin thread, and get to appliquing. Okay, so here are my two blocks, one that I finished beforehand and one I just appliqued right now. It only took about 30 minutes, not even that, to completely applique this turkey. It's a very quick applique process. And I simply did a very tiny zigzag around everything except the eyes. For the eyes, I just did a simple straight stitch, so it's all, that would be a raw edge, applique there. And all of these basically are too. In some cases, the zigzag did cover the edge. In some cases, it didn't. But with the fusible web, I'm not concerned about it. It's going to stay. And I'm going to actually place these on each end of a table runner, and I'm going to find one of my blocks that I've already done to place in the middle, and it is going to be just an adorable table runner. So hopefully you all will make one of these table runners, or at least make the block, maybe put together a So here we have just a small table runner that I've created using 2 blocks. Now these 2 blocks were actually made with just 4 rows of 4 of the 2.5-inch squares, plus we did curve some of the ends there, and I'll show you how that's done. But for the block that I'm going to share with you, it is going to be 5 rows of 5 2.5-inch squares, because I do want each of my blocks for the next 52 weeks to finish at, or to be 12.5 inches, and then they'll finish at 12 inches in the quilt that you make. I want them all to be the same size. So let's take a look at that. So as you can see here, I have pulled 2.5-inch squares, and they're predominantly oranges, rusts, golds. Some are light, some are medium, some are darks, and the scrappier the better. And your block, your pumpkin, doesn't actually have to be completely orange. You can add some browns in there, greens, whatever you choose. This is your pumpkin, so you can choose whatever color scheme you'd like for that pumpkin. We are going to use some creams here, in the case of my pumpkin, to create half square triangles on these outer 4 squares in order to create the curve on the pumpkin, and you'll see how this is done as soon as we get to the sewing machine. This will be the stem, and then you need to pull 2.5-inch strips, and that's what we're going to use to finish out the bottom 3 sides and the top 2 sides here to create the 12.5-inch block. So let's go up to the sewing machine and we will get started on putting this block together. So you'll see here that I've got my pumpkin blocks laid out. Again, these are 2.5-inch squares. All of these are 2.5-inch squares. I have laid them 5 by 5, 5 across, 5 down, and I have pulled 4 2.5-inch cream colored scraps because I'm going to make half square triangles of these outer 4 squares to create a curve to the pumpkin. And I do have one dark stem, so this is a 2.5-inch square for the dark stem, and then we're going to be including 2.5-inch strips on that. Let me show you what that looks like. So I've also pulled some 2.5-inch strips in light, and this is what we'll be using to finish the top of the pumpkin and the sides of the pumpkin. So before we start sewing the rows of the pumpkin together, I'm going to take the outer 4 squares to this pumpkin, and I am going to create half square triangles. So I'm simply going to take a cream and a print, put them right sides together, draw a diagonal line on each of those. I'm going to be sewing on the diagonal line in this case to create this half square triangle. Typically we sew on either side of it, but in this case we are going to simply sew right on the diagonal line. So I'm going to start stitching directly on the diagonal line. This is a little bit different than the typical half square triangles that we create. But it's a fast, easy way just to use the same 2.5-inch squares instead of pulling larger squares. Okay, now I think you can see what I'm doing. Again, I have this, it's called Add a Quarter ruler, and there's a lip there which allows you to find that seam allowance. I'm laying it on there and cutting away this excess And this will be my half square triangle. I'll take these all and square them up and then press them, and I'm going to place it over on the corner of the pumpkin to create that curved unit that we need. And I'll do that with the rest of these, and I'll be right back. So now what I'm going to do is web this block. You'll see I have it laid out 5 rows of 5, and right now I'm just going to deal with the pumpkin. We'll deal with the stem later, but we're going to start up in the left corner, and I'm going to flip the first block second row onto the first block, the very first row, and we're going to bring it to the sewing machine and start sewing 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to work our way all the way down this first and second column. So I'm bringing the second block, flipping it over onto the first row. There we go. This is called webbing the block. It helps keep everything in order. Taking the third one, flipping it onto the first row. And the fourth one, flipping it onto that first row. And then this last one, we're going to flip it on top of there. All right, so we have our first 2 columns sewn together. Let me get rid of this little guy here. And we'll see what we've got. Okay, so there's the first 2 columns of the pumpkin all sewn together. Now we're going to do the 3rd column, the 4th column, and the 5th column just by flipping these blocks onto the previous row as we sew down. All right, so we've webbed the columns so far. Now we're going to web the rows and get those sewn together. And then last, I'm going to show you how to attach your stem to your strips here, and I'll give you those measurements in just a minute, as well as the side measurements. One thing I wanted to just clarify is on all of these corner units, which we've created half square triangles out of 2 2.5 inch squares, a cream and a print, Once I created the half square triangle, I did have to press it open and then square it up to 2.5 inches so that they matched the rest of the squares. If you're having a hard time getting a 2.5 inch square to result from using 2.5 inch squares, just grab 3 inch squares in the creams and the pumpkin colors and create your half square triangle. And then when you open it and press it, you can square them up to exactly 2.5 inch squares, which is what you need in order for it to fit in the pumpkin block. Now I'm going to sew the rows together. It's going to start at the top, and you can work your way down. You can certainly pin if you want, but be sure to nest all of these. And what I would do is nest all of the seams in one direction for one row and the other direction for the next row. So for this first row, I'm nesting everything. The seam allowance is coming toward me on the top. I apologize if you hear my Boston Terrier. She's next to me sleeping and she's just started snoring. Okay, here is the first row that has been webbed, and now I will just continue working my way down the block until I have the whole thing webbed. So here I have the center portion of the block done. So here's the pumpkin, 5 rows by 5 rows. And now we're going to create the top portion of the pumpkin, and that's the 2 strips that will be on each side of the 2.5-inch square, which is the stem. Each of these strips is 2.5 inches wide by 4.5 inches long. So those are going to be needed for each side, and we'll simply sew the stem in between the two. I'll sew those and I'll be right back. So this top row, including the stem, is done. As you can see, I've sewn it, pressed it to the dark, and now I'm going to attach it to the top of the pumpkin. I'll sew that and I'll be right back. So the pumpkin is finished, the stem row has been added. Now we need to add a couple of sections or some strips on each side of this pumpkin in order for it to be a complete 12.5-inch square block. So my pumpkin block is finished. It is 12.5 by 12.5 inches. Once you've pressed it, make sure you square it up so that it is 12.5 inches square so that it fits with all the other blocks we'll be making. So this is today's block, and I called it Crossing the Lines, and it's simply 6.5-inch squares with 1.5-inch strips. What I have done here is I have pulled 4 different, in this case, sort of a light to medium value in a blue. And hopefully you can see that I've got 4 different squares. I cut them on the diagonal, and you'll see that as I go through the instructions once, and then I'm sewing these 1.5-inch strips in between the 2 triangle sections that I have cut apart. And then we are placing a 6-inch strip between these 2 pieces, and then a 12.5-inch strip here. And that's how the block goes together. And then of course what I have done is pressed all the seams toward the dark. And in the case of this block, the dark is the strip itself. You may choose squares that are dark and strips that are light. And then when you press, you're going to be pressing just the opposite of what I have done here. But that's totally up to you. And some people, in fact, I'm seeing more and more quilters who are choosing to press all of their seams open. And that's a wonderful option for you. Just make sure that your stitch length is a shorter stitch length so that you're not seeing the seams pull out when it's being used and when it's being quilted. So this is the block. I love it. I like it. The scrappier the better. In fact, I use blues here, these light to medium blues. You certainly don't have to use matchy scraps. You can use, here are 4 different squares that I'm going to use for the sample block. And I have this dark brown strip that I'm going to be using to piece this all together. So the first thing we're going to do with all of these 6.5 inch squares, and you need 4 squares per block, is simply cut it on the diagonal. And then I'm going to take it to the iron and I'm going to press a crease in there, and I'm going to press my 64 inch length. In fact, I've got a couple of links here of some strips, and these were strips, 1.5 inch strips that have been used in something else, and as you can see, it's been pulled apart. I don't even remember what it was that they had been in. They're kind of hairy on the outside, which means, you know, they've been in a project and then removed. But I'm going to use these for this particular block. I think what would be fun is to create each and every block different, so it's a really scrappy one. If you don't like that look, if you want it to be a little bit more uniform, you could go through and make sure that all of your 1.5 inch strips were identical for the entire quilt. There's a variety of things you could do, or maybe your 4 squares could all be identical, and then maybe you're using a similar value of the strips in each one. There's so much you can do. Look through your scrap stash, see what you have and what you can do to make this fun block. So the first thing I'm going to do with my 4 6.5 inch squares is simply cut them on the diagonal. All right, so now I have 4 different squares. Let me see if I can get them pulled apart here so you can see them. All right, there we go. So there's my 4 different squares. Now I have a total of 8 triangles. And what I'm going to do is take this to the ironing board, and I'm going to press a crease in each one of these triangles right there, so that when I sew my strip on that, I'm going to have a crease in the strip as well as in the triangle, and that will be the matching point, so everything goes together nicely. So make sure that before you go to the sewing machine, you definitely press a crease. You can either do it by your hand or take it to the machine or to the iron and press it. So that has to be done, and then you need a total of 64 inches of the 1.5 inch strips per block, and what you're going to need is a total of 4 10 inch strips. So let me just go ahead and cut that here. Here are 2 of them. All right, and I need a couple more here. And these 10 inch strips are actually going to be trimmed away. You'll see that once we get into the piecing of this. And then we need 2 6 inch, and that is so close, but not quite. So I need 2 6 inch strips. And again, I am using leftover remnants. Whenever you can, use leftover remnants. Absolutely do that from your scrap stash. It's a great way to use up your scrap. So there's 2 6 inch, and then I need 1 12.5 inch. Oh, I got 12, but not 12.5, so let's go to this one right here. All right, I'm going to move it back here so that you can see a little better here. Okay, there's 10, 11, 12, and a half right here. Okay, so I have all the parts and pieces that I need, and then I'm also going to take these 10 inch strips of fabric to the iron, and I'm going to make sure that I have a nice crease pressed in all of those. That crease is what we are going to match up with the crease on the triangle. So make sure that's done as well. So now I'm going to make sure the pressing of the creases is nice and firm on the iron, and I'll meet you at the sewing machine. So here I have the block laid out, and again I am using 4 different 6.5 inch squares, and as you can see I've kind of laid them opposite one another, and I have my 10 inch strips right in the center of each of these, and I've got my creases in not only the 10 inch strips but also in all of these triangles, so I have a matching point when I sew this together. So I'm just going to start up here in this corner, and I'm going to match the crease on the triangle with the crease on the strip, right sides together. And I am just going to place it on my sewing machine and stitch it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now let me see if I can get this so you can see a little bit of what I'm doing here. So I'm simply just sewing down the seam here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you'll see here that the triangle is centered on the strip. So there are edges that are coming off both sides, and that's important. You need those edges coming off, and you'll see it here in a little bit when we trim this. So now we've got one of these done. Now I need to take the other one and make a complete square. I'm again matching the crease with the triangle and the crease and the strip, as you can see here. And I'm going to lay it on the machine. So a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, you'll see that the stripe or the strip, the 1.5 inch strip, is centered there between the 2 triangles. And we'll be taking this to the iron here shortly. And since my dark is the strip, when I go back to press, I'm going to be pressing everything toward the center, toward the strip. If your outsides were darker, then you press your seam allowances out. But in my case, I'm going to press all of my seam allowances toward this dark brown for this particular block. All right, so then we're going to lay it back in here, and we're going to do the same with all 4 sections here, pressing the triangle, or stitching the triangles to the strips, matching all of these creases so that they're stitched on there properly, and then we're going to do the pressing. Let me accomplish that, and I'll be right back. So for this block, what we're going to be doing is trimming each of these squares to 6 inches. And then when we add our 1.5 inch strip here and our 1.5 inch strip there, we'll end up with a block that's 12.5 inches unfinished. And that's the goal for this Scrappy series. All of the blocks are 12.5 inches, so you can use them together if you wanted. Now, again, you can make this block any size you want, depending on what kind of scraps you have in your stash. Doesn't have to be this size. It can be smaller. Maybe you have 5 inch squares and 1.5 inch strips. Certainly go ahead and do that. Have fun with it, and enjoy using up your scraps to make beautiful blocks. But what we're going to do is trim each of these squares to 6 inches, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. Before we do any trimming, I wanted you to see that I have taken each of these to the iron, and I have pressed a crease lengthwise down the center of that strip. So basically, when I laid it on this ironing board, I made sure that I was lining up the seam allowances here, and then I pressed a nice sharp crease there. That crease is a line that I'm going to need as I trim these to 6.5. So I've done that in all of these. I've pressed a crease down the center of that strip. Now we're going to show you how I'm going to trim these up to 6 inches. They're going to each become a 6-inch square. So there's a diagonal line here in the center of my ruler, which I am matching up to that crease in that strip. That's very important. Get it as close as you can. And then center this ruler on this 6.5-inch square as closely as possible, and then trim around. And so I'm just eyeballing it and centering it, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the excess here. And this is a 6-inch ruler. I also have a 6.5-inch ruler, but this one is a 6-inch ruler. Let me flip it around here. Again, I'm lining up these sides because they've already been cut, and the diagonal line is going down the center. All right, now each of my squares is a perfect 6-inch square, and it's got the strip in the center has a nice square on each end. So I'm going to do that to all 4 of these. I'll get that done and I'll be right back. All right, so I have my 4 squares trimmed up to 6 inches. I have them laid out. It's kind of looking like a bit of a pinwheel here as well. But now I've got my 6-inch strip here, my 6-inch strip here, and then the 12.5-inch strip is going to go here. The first thing I'm going to do is sew this 6-inch strip between these 2 and this one between these 2. And then once that's done with the seams pressed to the dark, then I will sew the 12.5-inch strip in between the top and the bottom section. And the block is then ready to be pressed and squared up to 12.5 inches. Let me get these sewn and I'll be right back to the tabletop. So I have the top section and the bottom section. I guess as you're looking at that, this is the top and this is the bottom, but I have them ready. And now I'm going to put the 12.5-inch piece together with sewn in the center of this. What I'm going to do, since this piece I know is 12.5 inches, I want to make sure that this section and the bottom section line up to that. So what I'm going to do is, again, put a crease in the center of this. This is kind of like what I taught when you're adding borders onto your quilt. You want to make sure that you're squaring up and keeping everything square. So I'm going to pin, let me grab, I guess all the pins I have are just these right here, but I guess they'll work. I am going to pin this 12.5-inch strip on the outside edges, first of all. And then I am going to pin this center crease to the center crease that's in that strip. And then what you'll notice is that the block itself is a little bigger. And what I'm going to do then when I sew this is I'm going to make sure that the block is up against the feed dogs, and then the sewing machine and the feed dogs will distribute everything between this pin and this pin evenly, and it will distribute everything between this pin and this pin evenly so that our block remains square. What has happened here is that there is a lot of bias right in this area, and when you press that, it does add a little bit of width in there. So it's important that you square this block up so that it squares up to this 12.5-inch strip. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and sew this. And when I sew it, I'm going to make sure that the block itself is up against the feed dogs, and I'll be looking at the bottom of this strip as I sew. Let me do this, and I'll be right back here. All right, so I have this one done, and it's just worked out beautifully. So this strip is exactly 12.5 inches, and although the pieces here, these 2 sections, were a little bit wider down at this end where all this bias is, because I pinned the strip here, and then in the very center, as I sewed it, it distributed all of the excess evenly between these 2. And then I pressed it open, and it's just nice and square. It lays nice and flat. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I am going to pin these to each side. I'm going to find the center of here to match it up with the center behind. And then when I sew this, I am again going to make sure that that part, that the block itself that's a little bit wider, is up against the feed dogs, because the feed dogs will help to square it up and distribute all of the excess evenly between the 2 pins. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll bring it right back to the tabletop here. I have a video that I'm going to link below on how to avoid wavy seams, you know, in borders, and you can do the same thing. It's the same concept in making the black. So I'm going to link that video below, and you can watch through that and see exactly how I'm using the same concept as I put borders all the way around my quilts. You can use that for making blocks, etc. But the goal is to keep each and every block as well as your entire quilt square as possible. So I've got 2 of these crossing the lines blocks completely finished. And again, I've pressed, in the case of these 2 blocks, I have pressed all the seams toward the dark, which happen to be the strips themselves. So everything is pressed toward the dark, and they have been squared up to 12.5 inches. So you can use this block in your Scrappy sampler quilt. For those of you who are new to my channel, I do want to recommend that you go out to a video that I have, and I will link that Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash video below in the description box. But that video will take you step by step on how to get your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, stored, and ready to use to make beautiful quilts. This is the techniques book that goes along with that video, and this is an additional patterns book with beautiful scrappy patterns in there so that you can use these patterns and use up your scrap stash. So take a look at that. I'll also have the link to my website for this book set if you're interested in just checking that out. Now let's take a look at the block. Don't forget, as I mentioned, to pull that PDF. And basically, all of these 52-week series blocks have been 12.5 inches unfinished. They will finish in the quilt at 12 inches. And this one is a series of 2.5-inch blocks. We do have 4 half-square triangles here. And to create those, we're going to be pulling 3-inch squares. And then after we make the half-square triangle, we'll trim it down to 2.5 inches. We're pulling from our strip stash. And so I pulled some 2.5-inch strips from my light strip set, and I've pulled a 2.5-inch strip of dark. So you're going to need those from your strip sets. So let's take a look here. What I used for this block, I used an 8.5-inch dark for the roof top of this Acorn. I used 2 8.5-inch side panels, if you will. Those are 2.5-inch by 8.5-inch strips for the side. I have pulled 2 of the 5.5-inch by 2.5-inch strips for this. So these are all 2.5-inch strips that I've pulled and just subcut them, 5.5, 8.5, and so forth. And then I have a 2.5-inch top, and I just wanted him to match the top of the roof there, so I have that for this particular square. Then these are my 3-inch squares. I have 2 lights and 2 darks, and I'm going to put these together as I've shown you many times using my Speedy Solutions scrap stash. Right sides together, dark with the light, or whatever color combinations your pattern calls for. We'll draw a diagonal line. We'll sew a scant 1/4 inch on both sides of the line, cut on that, press it and square it up to 2.5 inches, and we'll end up with a total of 4 half-square triangle units for this block. And so that's what we need. We also need a total of 14 2.5-inch mediums and darks to make up your Acorn. You've seen me put together half-square triangle units many times on most all of these 52-week series of Scrappy blocks. But what I simply did was place a 3-inch light and a 3-inch dark, in this case that's the size we needed, right sides together. I drew a line on one diagonal, corner to corner, and then I simply took it to my sewing machine and I sewed a scant 1/4 inch on both sides of that drawn line. It's kind of hard to see it. You can see it a little bit better on this one. And now I can simply cut on that and cut them apart. Before I do that, as I've shared with you before, I like to cut from sewing or stitching line to stitching line as I separate them. That just gets rid of some dog ears. And so that's how I like to separate my half-square triangle units when I've done them chain stitch like that. So I've gotten rid of some dog ears. Now I can simply take my ruler and my rotary cutter and cut them apart. Whoops. Sometimes when I'm seated doing this, I'm not pressing hard enough. There we go. For squaring up each of these half square triangles, and they each need to be squared up to 2.5 inches, I am going to use my Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, the trimmer A, and I'm going to use the 2.5 inch stitching line here. I'm going to match it up with that stitching line on the triangle, and I will cut around and get rid of the excess. If you don't have a Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer or any other fancy type of a trimmer, you can certainly just use an OmniGrid or any ruler that has a 45-degree angle in it. If you do have one of these, then you would simply press this open, and I will probably just press toward the dark, and then once it's pressed, then you will take your ruler, line it up on the 45-degree angle, and then make sure that everything is squared up here at 2.5 inches and trim away the excess there. So that's how you could trim it if you're using a square ruler. You would have to press them open first. Because I'm using this triangular shaped Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, I do not have to press them open. I'll leave them just as they are right now. I'm lining up the 2.5 inch stitching line on the ruler to the stitching line on the triangle, trimming away the excess. There's not a whole lot. As you can see, that was all that I needed to trim away from the rest of that. But that's very important. That has to come away, or you're not going to get your block to go together well. And the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer has these really nice little slots right there, which cut away that extra dog ear. And now I can take these to my iron and press them. They're now all squared up to 2.5 inches, and I've got all 4 of them finished here. I'm going to go press those, and I'll be right back. All right, so I've finished my half square triangles, and now what I have done is laid out the block so that it's ready to be sewn together. And I see I've actually laid it out so that it's facing me and it's upside down for you. I apologize on that. But we're going to first of all start with the top of the acorn. Here's his little stem, and these are the 2 5.5 inch strips. They're going to be sewn on each side of that little 2.5 inch square. That makes the stem. Then on this row, we're going to take the 8.5 inch strip. We're going to sew these light, dark half square triangle units there, and that finishes the little roof top to that acorn. Make sure that you orient these half square triangles properly so that it creates that slant there for the roof. Then we'll work on the acorn itself, and there are 4 rows wide and 4 rows down, and notice that I have the 2 little half square triangles down here, and they finish off the bottom of the acorn, so make sure that you orient those correctly as well. And once these are sewn together, then we'll sew these 8.5 inch strips to each side, and then we can sew these units together. So I'm going to go ahead and get that sewn. I'm going to start first with these 2 top rows, and I'll bring it back to the tabletop and show that to you when I'm finished. I've turned this around for you so that it's now facing you and the acorn is not sitting on its top as you're looking at it. These are the top 2 rows that I put together. That included the 5.5 inch light strips with the 2.5 inch square for his stem, and then these are the 2.5 inch half square triangle units sewn to each side of the 8.5 inch strip. So that's the top 2 rows. Now we're going to finish the bottom 4 rows, and we'll do that just by starting with the squares themselves, and these strips will be sewn to that once the squares are complete. So what I like to do is simply web my block. You've seen me do this many, many times. I'm going to start, in my case, this is the top left. In your case, it would be up here. But I'm going to take the second row, place it on top the first, bring it up to the sewing machine, stitch, bring this one up to the sewing machine, continue stitching, bring this up to the sewing machine, continue stitching, and bring this up to the sewing machine and continue stitching. I will have webbed the first 2 rows together. Then I'll bring it back here and pretend this first 2 rows are stitched. Then I'm going to grab the 3rd row and do the same thing. I'll grab this first one, lay it on top, and then I'll continue doing that with all 4 of these, and I'll do the same with the last 4 rows. They'll all be webbed together with 1 line of stitching. Then I can simply sew the rows together. It's just a very efficient way of webbing your blocks together so that things stay in the right orientation and you're less likely to get things messed up. So I'm going to go ahead and get that sewn. I'll bring it back to the tabletop. So I have webbed these 4 rows together, as you can see here, and they're all webbed right here. And now I can simply continue sewing these rows together. What I like to do as I'm working through each row is I'll finger press. So I finger pressed all of these this direction. I finger pressed all of this going this direction. All of this is going this direction, and all of this is going this direction. That way everything is laying opposite, and it will nest beautifully when I flip them together. And I finger press them at this point, and then once this portion is stitched together, then I'll take it to the iron and press it with the iron. So let me get these 4 rows together, and I'll bring it back to the tabletop. This fun little block is coming together. So I have the top 2 rows here. This is now put together and pressed. I've pressed all of this up, and I've pressed each of these rows in opposite directions so they nested beautifully. Now we can attach these 2 8.5-inch light strips to the sides of the acorn. Make sure that you're doing this properly. This is the bottom of your acorn. These are the sides, and then we'll be able to put the top on. So let me put this together. I'll put it all together as one unit, and I'll press it and square it up to 12.5 inches, and I'll show it to you here in just a minute. Here are both of the acorn blocks. I just think they're absolutely adorable. You could have fun using scraps, and maybe you have a specific fabric that you'd like to use that's in your stash, however you'd like to make them, but I do think that they're just a really fun and simple block. Great way to use up lots of 2.5-inch squares, and a great way to use up your 2.5-inch strips that you have in your stash. Don't forget to pull the PDF, which gives you the information on what you need for the block. It gives you a sample idea of a quilt that you could put together for a fun wall hanging for fall. Make sure that you do press and then square up the block to 12.5 inches. They do need to be squared up to 12.5 inches. They will go into the quilt and finish at 12 inches. And one last project that I do want to mention is on the wall here. It's my Fall Fields of 4. This was a mystery quilt series. It was a 4-part series. I will link the videos below so that if you'd like to look at those, you can go out at your leisure and check those 4 videos out. There's PDFs of instruction as well as the templates that you would need for this quilt. Hope you've enjoyed today's series of videos that might inspire you to get some last-minute projects done for Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel. If you are new to my channel, please don't forget to like and subscribe and share my videos with your friends, with your quilt guilds. That really helps my channel to grow, and it helps it to get out to other quilters just like yourself. So until next time, happy quilting.